All right, we're back at the Expert Series Conference, and we are going to be talking value analysis now. Joining me is our expert, Steve Kinsella, president at the Data Leverage Group, LLC. And Steve, really excited to take some of your words and have a conversation today, because I know we just kicked off your Expert Series, but I've known you for quite a while. And I'm excited to dig into just achieving true efficiency through value analysis. And I'll even say this, recently went to the AVAP conference. And if you don't believe out there as you're listening to this, that value analysis is on the rise, you'd be mistaken. Attendance tripled. And what's interesting about value analysis is it's multidisciplinary and it requires a lot of communication, Steve. And so you're touching just about everybody in the healthcare organization and the work that you do. And I want to welcome you, and maybe just some quick thoughts on value analysis and why you're so passionate about it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Justin. Great question. I'm passionate about value analysis because it's always new and different, right? There's always unique challenges with every client that we work with. A lot of themes, similar themes, but the challenges are a little bit different for everybody. And so that really keeps it interesting. And everybody I meet is, we've talked about in the past, very passionate about value analysis. So it makes it really fun.
Well, I'll say right off the bat, as you know, value analysis, and really I think it started a lot with just a clinically integrated supply chain, but it's evolved into so much more than that. But for it to be successful, it requires leadership to be really bought in, and not just bought in, but informed. And so why is this so foundational for value analysis projects, initiatives, and value analysis teams to be successful? Why does leadership have to be so bought in?
Yeah, a great question to start off with. It's very foundational because leadership really needs to understand that value analysis, first of all, it's two things. It's both a strategy as well as a process. And I try to remind people whenever we talk about value analysis, it's that really those two things. And that's really important because it's not uncommon for leadership to kind of get that it's a strategy, but they're not quite there when it comes to the process piece of it. So it's really important to make that distinction on the front end when you're getting that, looking for that leadership and stakeholder buy-in on the front end. And it's okay if you're a value analysis leader and coordinator out there to make that distinction to leadership, because they really do need to understand that they need to support not just the strategy, but also the process.
It's interesting too, because when we say leadership, there's leadership at so many different levels too, right? There's leadership at the top of the organization, which is what we're really talking about here, but you're engaging a lot of department leaders as part of the process itself. And I feel like a lot of it is, and I've read this in your expert series, content that you've been putting out on power supply, but it's also a big alignment, like department leadership, and then having that funnel up to really the mission and the value and the goals of the organization, right? Like, is alignment really important to make sure that everybody is staying together when you're trying to move these initiatives forward?
Yes, alignment is huge, right? Because if you have alignment, then it's really difficult for those rogue departments or people to circumvent the system, because it's just going to come right back, because the value analysis team, value analysis coordinator, the leaders of those committees are empowered. And so you can really, with good alignment, you can really nix, if you will, all of that rogue and circumvention that it tends to happen.
You know, this conference itself is very collaborative and cross-functional. We have audience from Beyond Clean, our sterile processing brand. We have Power Supply, which is obviously the supply chain and value analysis brand. We have First Case, which is the operating room. And so we have a lot of different clinicians and supply chain leaders and frontline technicians out there. And really, one of the visions for having all these different brands was for us to role model collaboration and what that might look like, and bringing in different kinds of topics. And I feel like that's what value analysis is really a collaboration, and a successful collaboration from what might have been otherwise siloed in healthcare. How do you create that? Because I feel like those silos still very much exist. And so you've got to get this culture of collaboration going for value analysis to be successful as well. What's needed beyond just having a coordinator for this collaboration to work and for these outcomes from these initiatives to be successful?
Yeah, another great question. So I'll try to think about this or deliver it's really three things to answer your question. First, you really need to have understanding at the key stakeholder level, or the stakeholder level is important beyond just the value analysis coordinator doing it, right? You need to really have understanding. And so taking the time for stakeholders to understand, like we talked about with the leaders, stakeholders need to understand that this isn't just some random process or thing that we're doing. It's part of the stewardship of the organization to do the right things, to evaluate what's really and truly needed. And that's really the core of what value analysis is. And so don't look past the education part of it with with all the stakeholders or some of the stakeholders, because that can really go a long way. And then I would say, next, I would say that it's really about having transparency with your communications and transparency with the data and information. So it's really easy to lose those stakeholders if you don't have transparent communications, okay? You really need to make sure that there's consistency in how you communicate, and as well as in the data and information that's being shared. So those are truly important to fostering good collaboration. If you maximize your education part on the front end with the stakeholders and they understand what you're trying to do, and then secondly, have that transparency with the data, information, and most importantly, the communication, I think that's super important to have.
Yeah, that educational and communication is so critical to success. I've talked to some department leaders and they've said, I don't really like being involved in value analysis. It's kind of boring. And I'm thinking to myself, that has a lot to do with like a lot of things in leadership. When you're trying to communicate a strategic vision, you really have to educate them on the importance, why it matters, and then they need to see progress. And I think that changes their perspective from, I'm just being invited to another meeting, to this is important work that we're doing. And you really do need to make that shift. And it's that education and the continuous communication, like you said. They need to know how things are going along. What was the fruits of their labor and being engaged in that process? And, I know you've spoken a lot about it, not just for the people that you're engaging at the department level, but even back to leadership, like we started off with. Leadership needs to always know what is going on as well, and they need to feel like there's progress that's happening. So how do these cross-functional teams and collaboration, once they buy into the vision, and we just talked about that strategy and getting the vision for the strategic approach, how do those cross-functional teams and that specifically the collaboration help for that strategy to be successful and really take a disciplined approach? Because sometimes I think the process, to your point, it's a process, can feel a little willy-nilly. And so locking that down, I think, has a big impact as well.
Yeah. So from my perspective, you really want the cross-functional collaboration, right? Because it's going to give you diverse perspectives on the problem you're trying to solve, or whether it's a new technology or a new procedure, etc. You really want a diverse perspective, to get that holistic view. And that what goes along with that too is some risk mitigation, right? So not everybody sees things through the same lens. And so the more diverse and cross-functional collaboration you can get, it's going to help mitigate those risks that might have been blind to you on the front end had you not included more or been more collaborative.
So let's talk about what are the first steps. If you're a director of value analysis, and I say this really through two lenses, definitely want to speak to those that are out there leading value analysis teams today, but I also want those, cross-functional team members to sort of know what's going on in the mind of a director of value analysis as they start to set up an initiative. So what is kind of the first step that they can take to improve their practices or their process?
Yeah, it's real simple. Take the time to map out your process. Like really take an intentional approach at mapping out every step of your process. The checklists. What are the other folks doing? Talk to some other folks. Become that internal consultant of your own process and map it out.
How does that uncover gaps and opportunities? Like, I'm assuming that when somebody starts to map that out, and I know every time I map out a process or a workflow, for our company, because a lot of the things that we do and the content that we produce, we put into workflows and we map that out and then we put it into action. And then we find all the things we didn't think about that kind of need coverage. What is it about the process of mapping it out that really helps us see where we can improve?
Yes. So what you just talked about, I'll add to what that becomes after you map it out. You move into an iterative process, right? We thought we got everything. We thought we got everybody together. We even mapped out right into detail. And then you put it into action and you still find the little things that could cause, gaps and spots that could hold up the process, right?
Bottlenecks, big time, I feel like, really get exposed.
That's the word I was reaching for. It was the bottlenecks. Sure. But also, I would just add that you're also going to find a different perspective after you map it out and while you're mapping it out. Like, do we have the right stakeholders and are we missing anybody? Number one. And you might find that you are. Okay. But also, I think equally as important that people don't think about is who are the stakeholders that are in the process but are not participating like they should. It's a tough question and it's a tough thing to do, but you have to get there with it. And that knowing who needs to step up and do a little bit more is really important.
Yeah, and I would say even just the handoff, like there's not just one person that's responsible for the entire process. They might be coordinating it. They might be leading it. They might be overseeing it, but everybody plays a role, to your point, and everybody has different things that they need to do at different stages. And I think that's what I love about having a technology supporting our workflows is how do I make sure that the handoffs are happening? Because to your point about bottlenecks, a lot of times people think of bottlenecks and they think it's like a volume, right? We can only do so much volume through this bottleneck, but sometimes the bottleneck is really just how quickly are we handing off the next step and making sure that the person who's taking the ball and going to run with it knows that it's their turn. Sometimes there's just a major delay in communicating that and that creates delays. And I know the rate of change in healthcare to survive these days just really can't afford that wasted time. So let's talk about technology's role. I'm a believer because I use the technology to manage our workflows. And, I know that that's what you do in your daily life. That's the work, and you understand the power of technology. So how can like a software solution really drive that communication, that collaboration, but something else that you said earlier, the transparency? How does software help us do that more efficiently?
So I believe having everything in one place with a platform or technology solution is way more powerful than people even give that credit to. Okay. Like you mentioned, it inherently brings transparency. It brings all the good things, transparency, visibility, as some people will say. That's not a good thing, right? But we know that it is. Okay. And I always try to think of the converse of kind of the discussion. So on the other side, if you don't have some sort of system or platform in place, I'm telling you right now, you have a black hole. Everyone I talk to, my experience, if you don't have a system in place, if you have emails and spreadsheets and something on some nebulous drive that no one in the system can get to except for you and a few other people, if you don't have a platform in place, you have a black hole. Whether you believe that or not, you have a black hole. So if you have an accessible, transparent platform, software platform that everyone has access to, that can easily get to, you no longer have a black hole, and that goes away. So I think that's kind of understated in that whole concept of either having technology or not having technology. So I think it's really important point.
Part of that transparency is just knowing what stage of the process you're in versus somebody knowing it. And that's the visibility and the transparency component for me anyway. And you talked about spreadsheets and managing things by paper and that whole process. That's a very manual effort. How can something like automation, really improve not just the process, but the experience for the people that are involved in value analysis? Like, I get the transparency part, but I feel like automation is almost taking what you just said to the next level.
Yeah, it is. I would say that the biggest benefit really is you're going to compress time to value. Some of the things we already talked about, the bottlenecks, people dropping the ball because they didn't know it was their turn to work on the next step, if you will, didn't know document was sent to everyone on email. All those inefficient examples, we could go on and on, right? So, but if you could, having workflow automation, you're just going to compress time to value. You're going to get there faster. It's really that simple. So I'm not suggesting that everything should be automated, because you just can't. But whenever possible, you really want to keep an eye on automation. Can we automate these steps? Can certain tasks and checklists be automated where they're sent off to the next person immediately? So you've compressed time from hours and sometimes days down to nanoseconds.
The rate of change in healthcare right now, and what we have to adjust to, is demanding that we work faster and smarter, and even just the staffing issues. So I think in the past, people are like, oh, we'll just throw more bodies at it. We don't have those bodies anymore. Technology really does have to help us. And I think another way is it helps us get rid of waste. And I've seen a lot in your writings and in our conversations about just the amount of waste that just creeps in to value analysis processes. Where and how does that creep into our day-to-day as we try to keep up with the rate of change?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question, because usually when we get to looking at waste, the most obvious bottlenecks have already been rooted out, okay? So now we're into that next level down, and it's really in all those multitude of mundane tasks and activities and things that everyone involved in the process needs to do, right? Or everything from, handing off a document so that someone can start their analysis, if you will. Maybe not the best example, but all of those handoffs and spots is really where the eliminating waste, and it adds up over time. So if we can, once again, compress those handoffs and times down from hours or days to nanoseconds through automation, that's the way to eliminate waste.
And you're talking a lot about clinicians' time too. And one of the feedback, and I'm a registered nurse, so I had this experience myself when I was working, as a provider. It's all that documentation time. It's all like, I'm here to deliver patient care. And so those mundane tasks that add up really don't put the clinician or a department leader, in the position to be doing what they do best and really at the top of their licensing, if they're a clinician, or at the top of their expertise level. I'll say that more broadly. And that takes away, from patient care. And so I kind of want to tie this back to that mission, that we're there for the patient. I know everybody knows that, but how can these waste reduction efforts and eliminating those mundane tasks, have a direct or indirect impact on how we deliver patient care and honestly, the quality?
It's about giving back time, getting our time back, right? By really streamlining and rooting out all the wasted time, we're able to get that time back and focus it more towards the patient care versus these mundane tasks that take much of our time.
So here's the thing about value analysis that I know, which is even from one initiative to another, let alone one health system to another, the value analysis process not only is different, but it's constantly changing, and it may change based on the initiative. So I think a lot of times when people think about, utilizing a technology or a workflow, they think of something that is, kind of in a box, right? Or it's an out of the box solution. And so you kind of have to adapt the way that you work to the way that system is designed. And everything I've read from you says that just doesn't work for value analysis, and that flexibility is so important. And you literally just said it earlier on, was we have to adapt our value analysis processes over time, because as we map out the process and then as we build those workflows, this process improvement is constantly ongoing. So I'm assuming that it needs to be adaptable. And I just wonder, like, how difficult is that? And why does it matter so much that it's adaptable?
Yeah, keeping in mind our previous discussion about rooting out waste, flexibility is key, and adaptability. And simply put, if you have to adapt your process to fit a certain software, you're compromising. You're in a compromising mode, is my view. Adaptability maximizing your adaptability is critical, because it will also maximize your ability to become more efficient, to attack and root out, from the previous discussion, all those mundane tasks. And if you're in compromise mode, where you're adapting what you do to meet a certain software, that's just not a good recipe. So you have to have maximum flexibility and adaptability. But I mean, it is okay. Don't get me wrong. It is okay we all have to compromise a little bit. But if you're compromising more often than not to fit a software's notion of how you should be doing things, then you're not going to be able to maximize your process and root out all that waste.
You're talking about getting rid of the mundane tasks and being able to save precious time. And for every compromise, you have a workaround that's associated with that, which could add all of that back in. I mean, is it kind of a no-brainer that you need to be able to customize workflows to truly achieve the time and efficiency savings that you're proposing by leveraging technology?
Yeah, I mean, if you truly look at every detail of what needs to happen and manage a new product request, you will see all those incremental opportunities that you have in front of you.
All right. So here's my last kind of topic of conversation. And anytime you're using a technology, you're talking about collecting and managing data. And you really can't have a conversation these days about data without talking about concepts like dark data, which you didn't spell it out, but you introduced it earlier. If there's no visibility, then that data may be collected, and it may be something that you have access to, but it's dark because you don't really know it's there. And even worse, if you're not collecting the data at all, it's really dark. Or if it's not accessible in a solution, it's just in a fax document, right? Or a scan document. That's really, really dark. But then we're trying to keep the data clean so that it's usable. So how do you, and I know specifically around value analysis, we're talking about item masters, right? How do you really put the steps in place, and what's happening kind of, behind the scenes and out in front that can help us really improve the quality of the item master so we can make informed decisions?
Yeah, data, right? Item file, PO data. Unfortunately, what I say, I wish I could give a positive spin here from the outset, but unfortunately, what I see with most clients is they don't trust their ERP, their data, and their PO data. I think it does get a little bit better as time goes on, but still there's this lack of trust with data, whether it's annual quantities, units of measure, etc. So I think some of the front and back end things that people can do to fix that, right? I always start with triangulating the med-surg distributor data back with the item file and PO data, because that's really where most of the transactions are happening, right? So I think very simply, take the time to triangulate that data back and fix and repair all of the units of measure for all those records that are not jiving and matching up correctly.
It's really just an exercise in validation, right? By triangulating it, you're not just doing a cross-reference. The triangulation itself, sort of one data set and another may corroborate against a third that may be faulty, right? And so you really need three different sources.
Yep. Sometimes the med-surg distributor, not pointing fingers, but it's not that the item file may be correct. It might be the med-surg distributor, right? So when you do further review.
All right. It makes perfect sense. And sometimes even how you log the information just doesn't line up. So
not
it's about,
that's the case all the time. Just saying that anything is possible.
Yeah. Well, and again, how you record the data versus how you receive it sometimes doesn't match up. And so you've got to create a language that allows it to be interoperable and relatable from one data set to another. So when you have bad data, this is really the closing kind of question, other than maybe some key takeaways as we wrap up. But when you have this bad item data, what kinds of waste does that create downstream for everyone?
Oh gosh, field orders due to incorrect units of measure, right? The kickouts because the units of measure or the price, it shows that the pricing and the PO was incorrect because of poor units of measure, incorrect units of measure, etc. Overstocking, right? When things show up because of units of measure issues. And probably more importantly, fulfillment issues because fewer items were delivered because of the units of measure issue. And, this all leads back to wasted time by people scrambling around, trying to fix things, etc., when it could have been fixed in the first place through ULMs.
There's waste from having excess inventory on hand that you don't need. And then there's when all of a sudden you don't have what you need, the wasted time that comes on the back end to try to figure out how you're going to solve for that. So it it's really, again, back to that conversation around efficiency. The cleaner the data, the better you can manage your inventory, and ultimately that creates some serious efficiencies. So if you had one key takeaway, and this is kind of the last one, Steve, I really enjoyed our conversation today, and you truly are a value analysis expert, and I hope everybody will, continue to follow your monthly articles on the Power Supply channel on this topic and ways to set yourself and your organization up for success, or participate. If you are somebody working on the front lines that's not directly responsible for value analysis, but you're a key stakeholder, definitely tune in to what Steve is sharing, because I think it's important for how we're all going to be moving forward. But if you had one takeaway, Steve, on really just optimizing this process, especially through collaboration to create those efficiencies that we're talking about, what would be that key takeaway?
Yeah, I think the key takeaway is that you are leaders of a process, value analysis, and your leaders put you in charge of both a strategy and a process. And you're expected to manage that as a process and as a strategy as you go along. And so if you're going to be managing it, you need to project manage it, right? And whether we like it or not, we're project managers at the end of the day. Every request that comes in, we have to manage it from beginning to end. We didn't go to school for project management, most of us, okay, to be project leaders, but that's who we are. And your leadership gave you a huge responsibility to take the strategy and manage it with a process. And so that would be the best takeaway, to consider that as you work on requests day to day and all the different things that you have to do. You have to wear many different hats. It's not just about a new product request and managing those. We get it. You have to manage back orders, right? Back orders, we didn't really even talk much at all about back orders. But there's so much going on there, and value analysis is the key, the frontline person that really needs to push all that stuff forward and make sure that things, the communications, everything we talked about earlier, the communications are there and things are being done in a timely manner. So keep all that under consideration as you're looking at value analysis tools or reevaluating your whole process and platform.
It's a great point about the back orders and how that elevates the need for value analysis and even just the volume, because it used to be you tried to standardize around one product, but we assumed that we would have infinite availability, and now we need redundancy, and now we need alternatives. So we are going from sort of simplifying the inventory to expanding it again, and we have to evaluate how that impacts the entire system, which again brings us back to the cross collaboration. So Steve, really, really great job. Thank you for joining me for this interview on our Expert Series conference today.
Justin, thanks so much. You made it very easy to have a conversation here, so that was great. Appreciate it.
You're the expert, so I just have to set you up to share your knowledge and information, and you do a wonderful job of placing importance on value analysis. And I think if you haven't been engaged in it and you're watching our interview today, if you haven't been engaged in the process and you are in a manager or director or any kind of leadership position, I assure you that you will get pulled in. And especially as time continues to go on and healthcare evolves and value analysis continues to get more sophisticated, and technology has really helped the pace of play with that. So Steve Kinsella, president at Data Leverage Group, LLC, joining me for this interview on the Expert Series conference. I hope everyone is enjoying the conference, and thank you very much for joining Steve and myself.